In this video, I'm going to look at the mechanics and the optimal technique for the swing. This is when you have a pretty good idea where an enemy might be positioned in the next room or hiding behind some cover, and you want to be aggressive and bring the fight to them. How do you gain an edge on someone who is comfortably holding an angle and probably knows you're coming? Of course, it helps to have a better gun and better aim than the other guy, but it is more complicated than that. There are ways that you can create an advantage for yourself in a swing situation, or potentially put yourself at a disadvantage. In this video, I'll talk about 5 variables of how and when you swing. First, how much distance to maintain from the corner while swinging? Do you hug the corner or maintain distance? Second, how wide to swing? I'll distinguish the wide swing from the narrow peak. Third, where to place your crosshair, and in particular what I'm going to talk about here is your left to right crosshair placement, how much of a buffer to maintain with the edge that you're swinging. Fourth, when to start aiming down sights. And fifth, the final variable, is how the enemy player is positioned, in particular whether they're holding an angle facing you straight on or more of a diagonal angle. I'll go through each of these variables, but to sum it up, you're going to have the biggest advantage as a swinging player when you hug the corner, swing wide and maintain motion, hold the wide crosshair buffer, and maintain maximum vision by waiting to ADS until you've acquired your target. And as it relates to the fifth variable, diagonal angles are what I call the Achilles heel of the swing. Your best chance of success is swinging to someone who is facing you straight on. Let's start by taking a step back and just recognizing what the advantages and disadvantages are when two players are squared off in different rooms. One holding an angle on an entryway, like a doorway or a window or a corner, and the other wanting to push in and pressure past that entryway. I'm showing you a hypothetical here on Clubhouse with a Cade anchored in cash watching the construction door, and a sledge in construction who is expecting that an anchor is positioned in that area. Cade here has the advantage of being able to focus on a single choke point where he knows the attacker has to push through. Sledge also has some idea where the Cade is, but maybe it's just an educated guess, or maybe it's based on intel that's a few seconds old, so it's not a pixel-precise prediction. Cade also has the advantage of being able to prone or duck behind cover and make himself a smaller target, whereas Sledge's full body is exposed as he swings across the door. He's a huge target. But despite those advantages, this scenario actually favors the Sledge. He should win this engagement most of the time. Sledge's big advantage is simply that he's moving, and movement is a big advantage in Siege. I set up this situation on Clubhouse as a hypothetical, but it actually happened to me. I was the Cade. I lost even though I did a pretty good job reacting and tracking him across the screen. The swinging player simply has a much easier job here, hitting a stationary target who's in a predictable position. One of the advantages that the swinging player has is Peeker's advantage. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because there are already lots of great resources online about it, but I'll give a really brief explanation and include some links in the notes if you need more. The server is the master authority for where everyone is positioned on the map, and if it takes the server 40 milliseconds to relay information to you about the positioning of other players, in other words, your ping is 40, then what you see on screen will always be 40 milliseconds old. If the enemy player trying to shoot is stationary, then that delay doesn't matter because they're in the same spot they were in 40 milliseconds ago. But if the enemy player is moving, and they were behind cover 40 milliseconds before peeking you, then that lag matters, and it puts you as a stationary player at a 40 millisecond disadvantage. Let's move on to the second advantage of motion in Siege gunfights. A moving target is fundamentally harder to track and hit than a stationary one. And with your swing technique, you can control how fast you move, and just as important, how fast you appear to be moving on the enemy player's screen. So that's where I'm going to turn focus. How do you move fast and appear to move fast to make yourself as hard of a target to hit as possible? The answer is found in those 5 variables of swing technique that I introduced at the top, so let's get into them. The first variable I'm going to talk about has a big impact on your perceived speed of movement. Do you hug the corner or do you maintain distance from the corner as you swing? If you watch a lot of tip videos, then you may have built a habit of keeping distance from corners as you peek them, because the way that perspective works in a game like Siege where your POV is in the center of your head, hugging a corner risks a situation where the enemy can see you before you can see the enemy. Basically, your elbow or your gun barrel pokes out around the corner before your head does, and since your head is where your point of view is centered, you can't see them even though they can see you. So it may seem counterintuitive that I'm telling you to hug the corner, but when you're aggressively swinging the corner as opposed to simply holding an angle, it can create an advantage that far outweighs the perspective disadvantage. And that's because the closer you are to an enemy, the faster you'll appear to be moving across their screen when you swing. If an enemy who's really far away from you moves a few feet, then it's only a small fraction of your field of view. If an enemy who's right in front of you moves a few feet, it represents a much bigger fraction of your field of view, and so it appears to be faster on your screen. I'm willing to bet that you've had an embarrassing whiff in this game on an enemy who was right in your face. Well, It's because the enemy who is right in front of you will move really fast on your screen, and they can be difficult to accurately keep up with and track. In this example swinging the CCTV breach, the sledge who swings from further back takes about 1.25 seconds to cross the defender's field of view from side to side, whereas the sledge who swings right up against the breach crosses the defender's field of view in about 0.8 seconds. That's a significant difference in terms of how difficult it is for the defender to accurately track the sledge's movement and try to land a headshot. So the objective in swinging tight to the corner is to get yourself as close to the enemy as possible, so that you can appear to be moving as fast as possible on their screens when you swing. But you also need to be mindful of perspective disadvantage as you creep up to the corner. So instead of holding an angle as you approach, it's usually better to avoid the angle and approach on a safer path. Before moving on from this, let's look at a real-world example from day one of the EU League finals between Navi and BDS. The defender in construction thinks there's someone outside the window, and rather than swing it from up tight, they slow peek it at a distance. So they do not move quickly across the attacker's screen, and because this is the last kill of the round, we get to see it from both perspectives. From the attacker's perspective, this is not a difficult peek to win against. Now let's move on to the second of our 5 variables, how wide to swing. And this will be quicker because my point here is simple. You lose the advantage of being a moving target if you stop moving. So if you're swinging an enemy, then don't stop swinging. Swing all the way across from one side to the other of the opening that you're peeking, or if that's not an option, then swing and rebound back to where you started, and keep moving, and crouch spam, and lean spam. Movement is your friend here. I have another gameplay clip to illustrate this. This one is of me holding an angle in the basement of Oregon in a desperate situation. I know that there's someone in the pillar and I'm trying to hold the angle. I hold the angle tight, but they swing me wide, and I lose the gunfight because I can't track them accurately as they move. The fact that they rebound back into position actually screws me up, because you'll see I lead my aim where this attacker was moving, but then I lose them as she snaps back. Especially with ping lag and the limits of human reaction time, it is not easy to track a target that moves unpredictably. Now for some pro gameplay clips. First, let's look at a pro clip from the EU League finals. You have an attacker holding an angle here, and he gets swung by a defender who does a good job maintaining motion and sprinkles in some crouch and lean spam. And you can see how even a very good Pro League player can't track the motion well enough to land shots and loses. To give a contrast, I also have a couple of clips where the swinging player stops moving, and it ends up being costly. In this clip, Shaiko is playing around Pillar of Oregon Basement, which is commonly known as Shaiko Spot, because of all the kills he racks up from here. He's just gotten a kill onto someone in blue, so Kanto, playing Ash, tries to trade it out from Tower Stairs. Kanto swings, but he comes to a halt as he shoots, and that allows Shaiko to flick and land the headshot. And here's another pro example, this one with Pengu in a clutch situation. To be clear, this is absolutely hopeless for him, no matter what he does, but it's useful here that we get to see this from both players' perspective because it's the final kill of the round. Pengu swings from tight against cover into a held angle, but he doesn't swing wide enough to escape the attacker's crosshair, which is being held tight on the corner. So it's an easy kill because there's no need for the attacker to track a moving target. I'll also note here again that this is a diagonal angle being held, because that's something I'll come back to later. Now on to the third of the 5 variables of swing technique, lateral crosshair placement. When people talk in tip videos about crosshair placement, I find they're pretty much always talking about the vertical crosshair placement for trying to land headshots. And landing headshots is important, but since it's hard to predict whether someone is standing or crouching or, God forbid, laying on the ground, or spamming somewhere in between, I think it's more worthwhile to pay attention to your left to right crosshair placement. And the basic tip I'm going to give you here is to recognize that you are not a machine with instantaneous reaction time, and to budget your reaction time into where to put your crosshair. The way I came to this realization is by playing back video of my terrorist hunt swings in slow motion and analyzing my reaction time to acquire and hit targets. And that's something I'd recommend you try yourself using a video player that lets you scrub frame by frame. If you hold your crosshair really tight to corners as you swing, what I think you'll find is that you'll routinely scan past an enemy and then need to snap back, which adds extra time before you fire your first shot, and it negates the benefit of having good crosshair placement if you need to flick at all. You'll be more efficient at killing targets quickly if you just build a reaction time buffer into your crosshair placement, so that the moment you recognize a target is the same as the moment they're in the middle of your crosshair. How much buffer you need to hold depends on the situation. If I'm slow peeking a corner from a long distance, or if I'm holding an angle on a slow peeking enemy, then it makes sense to hold that angle pixel tight. Or if I'm really confident where the enemy is going to be and I'm going to pre-fire them before I actually see and recognize them, then I can hold the angle tight. But if I'm wide swinging a corner from up tight and I need to recognize and react to the enemy's position before I start shooting, then I probably need a pretty wide reaction buffer. And this is something I'd recommend you practice and watch out for situations where you find yourself scanning past an enemy and then snapping back to them. Now on to the fourth of the 5 variables of swing technique, when to aim down sights. This is again something that's situational, so I'm not going to give you a hard and fast rule. What I really want to do here is highlight that there can be significant advantages to waiting to ADS until you've spotted your target. And the big advantage of waiting is that it gives you a much wider field of view without obstruction from the frame of your scope. Yes, the ADS animation costs precious time, but if it means that you're able to find and acquire the head of your target a little bit quicker as you swing the corner, then it's a net positive. And remember, you can start shooting before you fully ADS'd, and your aim starts to become more accurate even before the animation is finished. I'll go now to an example from one of my matches that I think shows this technique working effectively. I know a defender is on the other side of this door in Trophy because I can hear them, but I don't know exactly where they'll be. So I swing tight and fast, unaim down sights, quickly locate my target, and start firing at the same time I start ADSing. And it's a headshot. The defender is already aiming down sights as I swing the corner, but he only lands 1 shot for 20 damage. He reacts quick enough to hit me before I hit him, but it's not an accurate shot. Because I'm able to line up the headshot, I win the fight. Now, note here that I'm playing as a Jackal with an angle grip, so I can swing an ADS pretty quickly. If I was a 1-speed Maestro with an LMG, I don't think this would have worked so well. It's situational based on the speed of your operator, how fast your weapon aims down sights, and how uncertain you are about the enemy's location. Finally, the 5th variable of swing technique that I'll talk about in this video is the type of angle that the defender is holding. In particular, are you swinging a defender who is facing you straight on, or are you swinging into a defender who is facing you at more of a diagonal? If you watch my video on pixel angles, then you already know why this is important. A player who moves across your screen on a diagonal path will appear to move more slowly than one who moves straight across left or right. Of course, you can't control where the enemy is positioned, but if you have some intel on where the enemy is positioned, then this is something to keep in mind when you're deciding whether to swing in the first place. If the defender is holding an angle straight on, then your advantage is stronger than if the defender is holding a diagonal off angle. That's it. Thank you for staying tuned to the end. I hope you're able to learn something new and useful from this video, and as always, good luck and have fun.